Dr. Mary Gallant. I'm a sociologist. I've been at Rowan University.
You've been teaching for over 30 years. As an associate professor of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at Rowan University, you've established yourself as an expert in this area of interest, as well as teaching the sociological intricacies behind the Holocaust. Can you first tell us how your teaching career began and what attracted you to sociology?
My career began when I was in kindergarten, I think. I was so eager to be part of it, and that stayed with me until I got, in university. And I started in the sciences. I was really interested in becoming either a doctor or something like that. A lot of people do that. And then suddenly I discovered sociology, and never could I turn from it. I just loved it. It makes sense to me to speak as a sociologist.
What attracted you to it so much?
People. I could speak about everything. We as people speak about everything. And you don't have to be, but you're curious about everything. So I didn't have to stay in one area like journalists in the field. You need a war story, or something like that to really feel things rushing forward for you. But for me, it was just being interested in everything about everyday life. This is the book that I developed. It's Coming of Age in the Holocaust. The Last Survivors Remember.
So as a Holocaust scholar, having written several papers, chapters, and volumes that have been in high regard at conferences around the world. This includes the World Conference of Holocaust Scholars and Survivors in Berlin. You're also a best-selling author, and your first book here, Coming of Age in the Holocaust, The Last Survivors Remember, was a narrative and analysis of the experience of the Holocaust survivors. Why was it important for you to share the stories in this book?
I felt that survivors hadn't been given voice. They hadn't been exposed to people caring about their interaction. I began by looking at something I had read in Elie Wiesel's work, Night. It was his very first, I think, that he published after his experience as a Holocaust survivor, in his lifetime being there with his family at Auschwitz and many other places just before that as a little boy. So I felt that it was time to give them voice. Somebody needed to listen to them, and I was going to be part of that. So I started with reviewing his book as part of a student newsletter, a global one, and I didn't stop. I haven't stopped since. It's something that's become a lifetime mission. And Coming of Age in the Holocaust is the first one that I published. I'm writing on something now that's in the same area. So that's also something I'm continuing. Coming of Age in the Holocaust is 7 chapters long, 301 pages. And in that, I'm looking at something that we didn't get from other kinds of materials. I refer to models in the first, different kinds of models in dealing with Holocaust survivors and their experience after the Holocaust. But other models refer to them from a humanistic point of view, from a philosophic, and sometimes a religious point of view. And those care about them now. Us, but also before. What would it be before, during their time in the camps? Left some kind of effect upon them, or had some kind of effect upon them. And I got the data for the book by going out to 18 different survivors, asking them to give me, just tell me about their lives when they were growing up. What was it like to be part of the Holocaust? What happened to them during the Holocaust? And just as though we were talking, keep on, I won't interrupt. It will just be an in-depth interview, and afterwards we'll speak about it too, and this will help me bring something back to others. So I have their summary of their lives in a nutshell, and they knew to give me exactly what I wanted, and when I didn't prime them, but for some reason they got the point. And they did give me what their lives were like, their ages, their details. They were very good at it. Now, I wanted an imprint of their way of thinking. So I didn't, for the first time, do anything to interrupt them. I took their portrait as they gave it to me. And then after that, we did talk. And I was so glad we had built that in. I had built that in because I know that once you're talking to somebody about what you really care about and nobody else bothered to care with you about it, and that's, I felt, the way it might be coming to them. Now, they might have had in the room or outside or nearby just whatever they wanted. If they wanted, their family with them, fine with me. Didn't have to be exclusive. But they mostly did want privacy as they were talking about it. And so that became the way I stumbled into and prospered from the kinds of information they gave me about their lives, then and now.
Your book speaks of children, adolescents, and adults who survived these death camps. But more importantly, they're models of survival. Can you tell us more about these models of survival?
The models of survival that we have starts with after the Holocaust, the medical model. The medical model looks at survivor syndrome. Survivor syndrome is about survivors who couldn't get past their injuries, their wounds. And to this day, I'm going back to look into that, to have that shock, that physiological shock, socio-emotional shock taken care of. The survivors who did in-depth interviews with me were those who did get over, as far as I could see. Now, that doesn't mean the grief went away. The in-depth wounds never healed. The profound wounds, parts of them did not heal, but they were remedied to some extent. Everyone is different. It has an idiosyncratic, expansion. And the idiographic expansion means that they all have a different way of approaching their story about their life that led up to the Holocaust. And then we did more where they told me what happened afterwards. And they kept on talking about it, and they were pleased to initiate. They knew I loved what they wanted to give me. And this was exactly what I wanted from them.
And can you talk a little bit more about the humanistic model for me that you discuss in your book?
The humanistic model is borrowed, just like the rest that flowed from the Holocaust, is borrowed from earlier works provided by theology, provided by religion, provided by philosophy, and, of course, the one that took care of the survivors who were ill, who were wounded, who needed to be brought out of their shock and trauma so that they could be well again. Most survivors didn't go that way. They worked with their families, and by being in positive contexts, increasingly involved in knowledge communities, people helping them after the war, it became for a lot of them, for most of them that I know of, much better. I've read a lot about DPs, and what I'm saying relates to that. So the humanistic model then is caring for the survivors after they come out, once they're liberated. And even if they can't go back to their families, giving them a sense that they are worthwhile people. They are important to the world. Implying that everything they've been through is something that they need to gradually leave behind, or just reference whenever it's useful to them. And when that happens, that will be good. But that takes a lot of doing. And so we need the scientific model, which gives us the medical model. The medical model is scientific, it's objective, it's put together with a care for the injured ones. Mostly you're getting people taken care of by the medical community right after they are found. Some of them died after they were found. The liberation of the camps in Germany gave us a lot of people who fit into that. It may not have been enough at Bergen-Belsen when they were discovered there. Bergen-Belsen was the second camp that was discovered. But what we know is that medicine itself, in its objectivity, in its science, even that, though it be without an empathic kind of approach, like the humanistic model gives us, this is something that built towards where we are in the Holocaust literature in terms of, let's say, conceptualization of the person, conceptualization of the self. Mine comes through from the sociology of the Holocaust, which I developed a course in here when I came to this university, and I presented it to them as sociology of the Holocaust. And once I did that, I could bring in the kinds of theories or conceptualizations of the Holocaust that we were interested in having them know. I was interested in the self. I was interested in empathy, especially sympathy, unifying with the other that I was speaking to who had been damaged by something in their lives they didn't deserve having happened to them. And they were brave. And I wanted to know why they were brave. So what is it that made them that way? I came up with a new model, which was the challenged identity model. So the last chapter, the 7th chapter, goes into that in some depth. It is based on how symbolic interactionists do their studies. And they too were interested in how we go about building ourselves, recreating ourselves, when a destructive extremity has made us over into something we even don't know very much about.
They say survivors of traumatic events can pass traits like hypervigilance or anxiety onto their children through DNA. What is your take on this idea of epigenetics?
Epigenetics is out of the scientific model. Online, USHMM on surviving the Holocaust. And, I found a conceptualization there where the person involved was, I believe, Jewish because father was a rabbi. And that's good. You can trust someone who's part of the knowledge community in which the crime was committed and went against, in which the great injury was done. Okay, so that person was a neurophysicist, I think, or a neuropsychologist, that they're going to be much more into objectivity and carefulness, and they have to be because they're practicing medicine. And that you can't fool around with. It cannot be given in mere words. It has to be given in the treatment and practice of medicine. So epigenetics then stems out of having to know something specific. And what I was getting from that article, which is a brand new neologism, is that they're interested in looking at that section of the self and the person that's involved in getting beyond what the parents did to you. And parents as survivors have been seen in the medical model as casting a shadow upon the lives of their children, a mark upon the lives of their children as survivors, like them in their families. So the epi part is what she is going to be looking at, and possibly looking at not just the person who is the child, not just looking then at the past, at what gave them the shock, but what they'll bring home to them as the shock. And for a long time, survivors were known as possibly giving certain predispositions to their children because of what they were feeling. They brought it. And, higher suicide rates among sons, among sons who were approaching manhood, and coming from taking on the pain of their parents, without knowing they were doing that. And they were thinking everything was going fine. And suddenly this great, terrible thing occurred in the family. So that's what they're looking at. And it's using the model that the Holocausts are presenting to us in their own familiar words when you ask them to be part of an interview with you. They're showing us how perhaps they did do something wrong, but we're not talking about that. Okay, we're just bringing them in to where the medicine can help them, but also with the medical model and looking at the social context created in the families by the person who experienced the trauma with the family he built for their good, hoping for the best for them, but yet somehow delivering something perhaps fixable. Should we be able to get some doctor, some good person, some knowledgeable person to help them? It helps them, but that's in the past. And so as we move from the 1950s through the 1960s with the Holocaust literature, we begin building back better, as you will allow. I have to tell you that this didn't stop there. The theories don't stop in the 50s or 60s. We just got the Holocaust as a name people were all using by the 60s. And so we're going on with it and with developing new theories. And by the time we get to 1992, when the Russians are giving us new data from all their collection, they don't really need it. They're discussing it not as the Holocaust, but as the great, Russian history or event. And we're able to get past that. The USHMM is looking into it. They're working with religious groups who are working with the Ukrainians, who are getting into them, older and younger ones, and their loss of self in the loss of their friends who are Jewish and having to witness it somehow at the time they're doing the massacres, which is very traumatic. Okay, so this is then new kinds, but Browning, for instance, and I'll probably mention his name more than once because I'm working a lot with him now in the work I'm doing now on World War II and the Holocaust. In other words, the soldiers encounter the camps, they are drawn into massacres and pogroms, and so there's the dead, the dying, and the living in the East, which is giving us a chance then to get at the Ukraine and their analysis of self, their shock, their trauma, and we're opening it up. And the Holocaust survivors who are giving us the data first, hand that I'm using are helping us. They'll be helping us reading this book. That's not the
More recently, COVID-19 pandemic killed millions of people worldwide before we knew about how to treat or protect ourselves from the virus. However, in the aftermath, the world seems to be suffering from a collective PTSD, depression, anxiety. As a sociologist, what are your thoughts on mental health post-pandemic?
Well, I think we're all in a collective behavior that relies on education and books and the media. Everybody's, a professional, as it were. Everybody's got an opinion on a shock. And PTSD in the 1980s helped us do that. Soldiers coming back from Vietnam, soldiers coming back from World War II had to be dealt with therapeutically because it's unpleasant to kill people. Nobody feels good about it. You don't feel good as a watcher on television. So this is my opinion, but I think with regards to the pandemic, we now have a position that if we're shocked, it can be various degrees of shock, and some of these can be traumatic shock. Positions then relate to really deep troubles. Did somebody in the pandemic get into trouble? Did we have more people dealing with specific scientifically corrected or scientifically diagnosed kinds of PTSD? Did people who died of COVID die more quickly because of this death awareness suddenly upon them? I know a lot of the talk in the media was on people who had great grief because the people, as the president was saying, had lost one of their dearest family members. And this is creating for them a great sense of loss that they would have to get over with. And so just remembering steps they could go through in the grieving process that came from research based on the medical model that Holocaust survivors were dealing with. Okay, so this was good for us during the pandemic to get into use that idea because we somehow are on the side of the Holocaust survivors. We want them to get better. We never wanted anyone to die. Anne Frank, I mentioned her before, loved that this little girl who died when she was in her late adolescent or early adult years. And when the war became heinous, she was sent to Auschwitz in 1943. And she had already, been in Westerbork, which was a transit camp in the Netherlands. But she was German, and they had to decide as a family to leave. And they were in business. It was a big deal but as soon as they completely understood the way things were going in Germany in 1938, they had to leave. And so in 1938, 39, they were moving to the Netherlands. And that was shock for them. She doesn't really show that shock in the diaries that she writes, and the versions of them that have come out from her father's hand. But as they were in hiding, and then somebody betrayed them in the Netherlands, 1938, I think. No. It was 1942 or 43 that I think they were discovered. At any rate, they lived 2 years in hiding, but he was in business there. So they lived before that in the Netherlands. It was, more years there than in the camps. But she died in March in Bergen-Belsen camp, and her father was somewhere else. Her mother died in Auschwitz, Birkenau. Birkenau was more or less a women's kind of area, but it was a big death camp from gassing. But Anne and her sister were sent into Bergen-Belsen, where normally they would be sent back to the war area, manufacturing, technology. In the Holocaust years, certain camps were given over to that. And had they lived, but a cousin lived. She and her sister died. So children with nimble fingers would be used in making small parts. The bright children, even better. So they'd be going to what was advancing technology in those days. And those camps you would survive in. Also, more people in the camp at Auschwitz, because it was a big reception area for all camps, that would be sent then to other camps they were living. But getting back to then the pandemic, I think we've all become too talk-oriented towards mental health. I think we're very healthy. The economy is healthy. Economists and people who took commerce degrees are talking about, well, it might have been terrible for some people, but I think we're doing all right. I think America's surviving. And I'm all for that kind of thinking. I think we're much better off getting healthy by talking to each other, listening to talk programs on it, and getting more involved in our lives and doing as much as we can to soak up whatever is done to help us get better at getting jobs, moving ahead, moving into lives that make us feel better.
Do you think we'll have some lingering effects of being in lockdown during the pandemic without having that social interaction? Do you think there'll be some lingering effects there, especially with like the younger population who that's all they knew was this world of isolation now that we're opened up again?
People whose children lost their early childhood, little person kindergartens or daycare centers, did lose a lot. And I hear also that people who were in a very vulnerable way in high school, their last year, were thrown out of their senior year class. None of the fun for a lot of them that they normally would have got for their lives could have been embraced in the times they were given during the pandemic to do things with. They were denied it. I don't know what kind of studies have been done. I didn't look into that yet. But I know that I couldn't go back to work. For a long time, I kept working on it, getting back, because I didn't know, was I offending somebody? I mean, would there be laws against this? If you go on the streets were empty. Where is everybody? You can't give people from your car. So yes, I think we had some shock, and you can follow the model. But I really think that we're not bruised too badly. And I think people who were in penitentiaries were probably the ones who are, by far and wide, the most who suffered the greatest from.
You have been continuing research and publishing while working on a third book, this time an informal social process shaping medical students during training as they contend with stress and uncertainty. What have your findings been regarding medical students and our future doctors?
What I found looking at the socialization to professional status, becoming a doctor, a practitioner, is one in which everyone is concerned that this being overly involved in science, by overly involved, I mean everything is depending on the science of medicine. The art of medicine comes in the third year. For them, first and second and third year, you're really dealing at the second and third year, really dealing with patients. You need to have empathy, not just science, and you can only get into second and third year You pass the scientific memory part, where you have to remember, I mean, literally libraries worth of textbooks and medical degree knowledge and so on. People get intimidated by that. It becomes they soak it in if they can, as much as they can, and they're successful most of the time and keep going. Where they decide they want to do it over again, I guess I'm not sure that they would. What you really need to do at that time, the people who are your friends are quite often your family, and they give you the most information and the greatest feeling of warmth, and you learn the best. So I'm thinking if there were a way to continue integrating their parents and friends, the general model of learning about medicine and doing good for their patients and becoming, like you say, relaxed and impassioned by things patient is impassioned about, you're probably going to do a better job in medical school. Because other research has shown that medical students who pick up support from their students, from fellow students, are those who do the better work, become the more relaxed, the better doctors, and they become more empathetic, and they gain more, therefore. And this is what the people who teach medical school say we're needing.
You've been highly regarded in your field, a 2-time winner of the Rowan University's Wall of Fame Award, a highly coveted Excellence in Scholarship Award, and numerous top professional awards. You've appeared on the cover of Top Industry Expert magazine and billboards in Times Square. What does success mean to you?
Success means doing a book, doing World War II and the Holocaust, doing medical school and friendship in medical school, learning what sociology might be interested in, as well as, and I helped establish that role for sociology. Now part of the getting into medical school, there's a section of it around here that we're acknowledging, and I think is everywhere in the testing to get into medical school, has a sociological component to it. And I hope, in my humble way as chair of department, working with those who also were with me on it in the Department of Sociology at Rowan, that we've something to learn from their being part of doing, if they choose it, a portion of their program in sociology. But for me, what I feel is worthwhile in my life, and writing comes for, and the people I know and I care about who love it and help me do this, that is Holocaust survivors.
Thank you for watching this Preferred Professionals exclusive interview with Dr. Mary Gallant. To purchase a copy of her book, Coming of Age in the Holocaust, The Last Survivors Remember, please visit Amazon.com.